In the wide, dry lands just past Dusty Creek, most days pass quiet as cattle under the sun. But one morning, something changes. Walt Granger, a soft-spoken cowboy with more dust on his boots than words in his mouth, finds a boy sitting alone on a fence post. No name offered, just a saddlebag, a busted compass, and eyes too old for 10 years. By nightfall, the town's crooked land agent is already sniffing around, claiming the boy's got no rights to his dead father's land. No heir, no papers, no chance. But Walt's seen this kind of trouble before, the kind that hides behind law books and polished boots. And he's not about to let a slick-talking snake rob a child of the dirt his daddy died to keep. What starts as a quiet act of kindness turns into a full-on standoff. One ranch hand, one school teacher, one shaky map, and a boy the law calls nobody. Can a worn-out cowboy fight a rigged system and win? And more important, can a lonely boy find the one thing he never dared ask for? A family. If you've ever believed doing what's right matters more than any deed or title, then saddle up and ride with us. Like, comment where you're watching from, and hit subscribe for more stories that speak straight to the heart. The North Pasture had been quiet that morning, the kind of quiet only the plains could keep. Just the hush of dry wind over buffalo grass and the far-off creak of the windmill pulling water from a tired well. Walt Granger was patching the fence line, hammer steady in his calloused hands, when he saw the boy. He didn't hear him, didn't spot him walking up the trail, just looked up from the post he was reinforcing, and there he was, sitting on the crossbar of the fence like a little crow, too still, too silent, 10, maybe 11 years old, thin as a willow switch. Clothes hung off him like they'd been passed down one cousin too many. A busted compass dangled from a leather cord at his neck, the needle spinning useless as if it knew it was lost. Walt pulled off his gloves slowly. "You all right there, son?" The boy looked at him, eyes dark and flat. He didn't answer right off, just shifted slightly, like even speaking might cost more than he had left. "I'm Eli," he said finally, barely louder than the wind. Pause. Gone. Walt nodded once. He didn't press for details. The kind of gone the boy meant hung different in the air. "You from the Turner place?" Walt asked. Eli gave a small nod. "Been walking since yesterday. Didn't know where else to go." Walt's jaw tightened. The Turner's homestead sat a few miles north, past the creek bend, good land, but hard. Eli's pa, Matthew Turner, had been a quiet sort, like Walt himself. They'd shared coffee once or twice after town meetings. Good man, decent. That kind don't usually get to stick around long in places like Dusty Creek. "You eatin'?" Eli shook his head. Walt didn't say another word, just offered his hand. The boy hesitated, then climbed down and took it. Walt led him to the house. By late afternoon, the smell of beans and cornbread filled the kitchen. Eli sat on the edge of the bench like he might be asked to leave any second. He stared at the tin plate in front of him like it might disappear. "You don't have to rush," Walt said, sliding a glass of water across the table. "Ain't nobody coming to take that from you." Eli didn't answer, just picked up his fork and ate like the food might vanish if he blinked. Walt watched him, quiet. He didn't need to ask what happened. A boy alone like that, showing up hungry with a broken compass and no coat. There were only so many reasons. That evening, Walt saddled his mare and rode into Dusty Creek. The sky was bruised with sunset, and the town looked like it always did, worn out and dusty, with more judgment in folks' eyes than kindness in their hands. He tied up outside the saloon, walked in slow. And there, in the corner, he saw him, Roland Skegg, all slicked hair and snake oil grin. He was talking low with Sheriff Murtaugh, their heads too close together for comfort. Walt watched as Skegg slipped something into the sheriff's hand under the table, an envelope. Murtaugh tucked it into his vest like it was nothing. Walt narrowed his eyes. Skegg had been sniffing around the Turner property for months, talking about development rights and unused acreage, said the place had no air worth a damn. And now, Turner's boy sat on Walt's fence with nothing but an empty stomach and a name full of dust. Walt stepped outside without a word. The night air was cooler now, the stars just beginning to show. Dusty Creek might have forgotten about Eli Turner, but Walt Granger hadn't. He rode home slow, saddle creaking under the weight of something more than his own bones. When he walked back into the house, Eli was curled up on the rug near the stove, his small frame wrapped in Walt's old coat. Walt crouched beside him, the fire throwing long shadows on the walls. "Get some rest, son," he said softly. "We got some riding to do come morning." The sun hadn't yet burned off the chill when Walt rode into Dusty Creek with Eli perched in front of him on the saddle. The boy didn't say much, not that Walt expected him to, but every now and then his hands clenched tighter around that busted compass like it was the only thing holding him together. They headed straight for the county clerk's office. Walt figured if Turner had left a will, it'd be on file. No sense fighting ghosts without knowing where they stood. Inside, the air was stale with dust and ink. Clerk Harmon, a man with a comb-over slicker than oilskin, squinted over his glasses when Walt stepped in. "Mornin', Walt. What brings you by?" Walt nodded once. "Need to check probate records. Matthew Turner passed. His boy's with me now, looking to find what was left in writing." Harmon blinked. "Turner? Don't recall seeing anything recent filed on him. Mind taking another look?" With a sigh, like the request was a burden, Harmon shuffled over to the narrow metal drawers along the wall. He flipped through labeled tabs with fingers that moved too slow for someone used to paperwork. "No will filed. Nothing under Turner, Matthew. Closest I got's a Marlene Turnbull, passed 4 winters ago." Walt frowned. "That ain't right. I remember Turner talking to someone about getting his papers in order. Said he didn't trust Skaggs sniffing around." "Well," Harmon said, shutting the drawer with a lazy thump, "if it ain't here, it ain't here." Walt thanked him with a nod, though his jaw had set like stone. Eli hadn't spoken the whole time, just stood beside Walt like a shadow. As they stepped outside, the boy finally asked, "What does that mean?" "It means somebody's trying hard to erase your father's name," Walt answered quietly. "But they're not done with him just yet." They walked the short block over to the schoolhouse. June Mallory had just dismissed the children for recess, and the clatter of boots and laughter spilled out into the dusty yard. She looked up as Walt and Eli approached, brushing a loose strand of gray-streaked auburn hair from her cheek. "Well now," she said gently, setting down a stack of spelling primers. "That boy looks like he's carrying 100-pound silence." "This here's Eli," Walt said. "Matt's son." June's expression shifted. Grief flickered, but she masked it quick. "Your father was a good man," she said to the boy. "He once fixed the latch on this school door and refused a dime for it. Said learnin' should open easy." Eli's lips barely moved. "He said that to me, too." Walt stepped in. "June, you recall if Matt ever asked you to help with paperwork? Maybe a will?" She nodded slowly. "He came by last fall. Asked me to look over a draft. He was planning to file it soon. Even had it notarized up in Abner's shop." Walt's brow furrowed. "There's no record of it at the clerk's." June hesitated. "Funny thing. I saw Roland Skegg near Harmon's porch 2 nights ago. Late. Didn't think much of it then, but..." Walt's mouth was a hard line. "He was paying off the sheriff last night. I saw it." June glanced at Eli, who stood tracing his finger along a crack in the wooden step, pretending not to listen. "Skegg's making his move," Walt said low. "Claiming the Turner land has no heir, that it's unoccupied." June's gaze hardened. "That land's been worked honest since before Skegg learned to lie." They stood quiet for a beat. A breeze lifted the dust, carrying with it the dry rustle of cottonwood leaves. In the distance, the saloon piano picked out a crooked tune. Walt finally spoke. "I'm heading back to the Turner place. Something tells me we missed more than just a will." June nodded. "Be careful. Skegg don't like being challenged." As Walt and Eli mounted up again, the boy turned his head. "Mr. Granger, are you going to stop him?" Walt looked down at him, voice steady as a fence post. "If a man's got breath and truth on his side, he's not as outnumbered as folks think." Walt didn't sleep much that night. The stars were sharp above the roof, clear as gilt. Every creak of the rafters felt like a reminder. Eli was under his roof now, and the boy's past was being rubbed out one missing record at a time. Near midnight, Walt lit the lamp low and pulled Eli's saddlebag from the peg near the door. He figured the boy wouldn't mind. He'd asked about it earlier that day, and Eli had just shrugged, said it was all his pa left him. "Mostly empty," the boy had mumbled. "Just a shirt and a busted compass." But as Walt ran his fingers along the lining, something caught. A rough seam at the bottom felt thicker than it should. He turned the bag inside out and saw a faint slit, stitched shut in haste. With his pocket knife, he snipped it open. Out fell a folded sheet, yellowed and stiff, creased a dozen times over. He spread it on the table. It was a survey map, hand-drawn but official, signed and dated, and not just by anyone. Down at the bottom corner was a name that still held weight, even up in these parts. Slim McCready, licensed surveyor, territory number 17. Walt let out a slow breath. The Turner. Land was clearly marked, the boundary lines neat and unmistakable. It wasn't just pasture, it included a creek bend, a low ridge, and even an outbuilding further north. All of it claimed, and all of it signed off. That kind of document might be more valuable than any will. By dawn, Walt had his mare saddled. He packed coffee, jerky, and left a note for Eli. "Gone to Dry Peak. Back before supper. Stay put." Slim McCready wasn't the easiest man to find, even when you knew where he was. Folks said he'd gone near blind after a survey mission during a flash dust storm. These days he stayed holed up near Dry Peak in a clapboard shack that leaned like it needed a cane. But Slim's signature still meant something in legal circles, especially to the county seat. It took Walt half a day to reach the ridge. The sun bore down mean and steady, and buzzards circled lazily overhead. When he found the shack, Slim was sitting out front on a stool, sharpening a stick with a knife dull enough to be ceremonial. "Walt Granger," the old man muttered as he squinted up. "You bring me trouble or tobacco?" Walt swung off the saddle, tipping his hat. "Just looking for answers, Slim." Slim nodded like that was an acceptable substitute. "You got the right brand for questions?" Walt pulled out the folded map. Slim held it close to his face, fingers tracing the lines like braille. "Mm-hmm. I remember this one. Matthew Turner. Good man. Brought me strong coffee and didn't complain once when we hit bedrock." "You signed it," Walt said. "I did. Stamped it too. Not many still ask for the stamp." Slim leaned back, tapping the map with one bony finger. "This here's real. Why?" "Because someone's trying to say Turner never settled that land, that there's no heir, no claim, and the county clerk can't find his will." Slim's cloudy eyes sharpened slightly. "Skeg?" Walt nodded. "Figures." Slim let out a slow hiss. "He came by here last spring, tried to buy me off. Said he needed me to redraw the boundary, leave that whole north bend off the paper. Told him I may be half blind, but I ain't half crooked." Walt folded the map slowly, carefully. "Would you swear to that?" Slim's expression turned stone serious. "In front of God, jury, or governor." Walt offered his hand. "Appreciate it, Slim." The old man grinned. "Don't thank me yet. Skeg's the type that smiles while he poisons the well." As Walt rode back down the slope, dust trailing behind him, he felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't quite hope, not yet. But it was the start of a line, a truth scratched into paper, backed by a man who couldn't be bought. And sometimes, that was enough to light the fuse. Dusty Creek's church social was the one thing that still felt untouched by the likes of Roland Skegg. Every third Saturday, townsfolk brought what they could, jars of pickled okra, skillet cornbread, string beans in chipped ceramic bowls, and tried to forget about taxes and dying crops, if only for an evening. Walt hadn't planned on going, not with things heating up the way they were, but June had stopped by the ranch that morning with a plate of sweet biscuits and that look she got when she wanted something done proper. "You should come," she'd said. "Eli needs to see folks again. Let him remember he's still part of this town." so Walt washed the dust from his face and dug out the cleanest shirt he owned. Eli stood at the basin in silence, scrubbing his hands like he was trying to make them new. When they arrived, the old white church shimmered in the late daylight. Lanterns swung gently from tree branches, casting golden circles across the grass. Music twanged from a fiddle, and laughter mingled with the smell of stew and molasses. Eli stuck close to Walt's side, eyes down, shoulders tight. "Let's grab a plate," Walt said. "Can't let the preacher beat us to the brisket." They had barely stepped toward the tables when a too-loud voice rang out across the yard. "Fine evening, ain't it?" Roland Skegg stood near the pie table, boots polished, vest tight across his belly. He raised a cup like a man offering a toast, but his eyes were locked on Walt. "Evening, Skegg," Walt said, flat. Skegg walked over, smiling like he already owned the dirt under his feet. "Glad to see the Granger place still makes time for community events. Say, I've been telling folks, land like Turner's, gone quiet like it has, it's a shame to leave it fallow. There's opportunity out there." Walt didn't take the bait. "You mean there's profit?" "Same thing these days," Skegg said with a wink. "I'll be speaking soon. Gonna share a vision for Dusty Creek's growth. You're welcome to listen." June appeared at Walt's shoulder, her voice calm but firm. Funny thing about visions, they don't usually start by erasing what's already planted. Before Skegg could reply, Slim McCready stepped out of the shadows near the back of the tent, wearing a coat 2 sizes too big and holding a rolled-up survey map like it was scripture. Walt felt a ripple go through the crowd. Slim hadn't shown his face at a public gathering in years. He walked straight up to Walt and June, nodded at Eli, and turned to face the crowd. "Some of y'all know me," he said, voice raspy but clear. "I'm here 'cause someone's lying. This boy," he motioned to Eli, "belongs on that land. His pa made it legal, and I signed it with my own hand." Gasps rose, murmurs followed. Skegg's smile faltered. "That map," Slim continued, unrolling it carefully, "shows every corner of Turner's land, and that boy's got more right to it than any man trying to claim otherwise." Before anyone could respond, a crash split the air, wood splintering, metal clanging. 2 wild steers bolted from the side yard, hooves tearing through picnic blankets and knocking over benches. People screamed, scattering. The animals plowed through the tables, scattering plates and pies. Walt grabbed Eli and pulled him back toward the water barrel. He spotted Skegg ducking behind the preacher's wagon, oddly calm for a man caught in chaos. It wasn't an accident. When the dust settled, the crowd was shaken, the speech forgotten, the moment broken. Slim was still gripping the map, edges torn and muddy now. Walt helped Eli to his feet. "You all right?" Eli nodded, breathing hard. "That wasn't just cows getting loose, was it?" "No, son," Walt said, eyes narrowing toward the wagon where Skegg had disappeared. "That was someone trying real hard to shut us up." The next morning broke colder than expected. A sharp wind blew in from the hills, carrying with it the smell of smoke. Not wood smoke, but the kind that lingers too long, clings to your clothes, and sticks in the throat. Walt rose early, saddlebag already packed with the map, Slim's signed affidavit, and the guardianship request he and June had spent half the night drafting by lantern light. She'd written every word herself in her careful schoolteacher's script, folding it slow like it might be a prayer. Slim had slept in the front room, stiff-backed and ready. "We ride before the town wakes," Walt said. "Fewer eyes, fewer questions." Eli stood near the doorway, still in his boots from the night before. "I'm coming with you." Walt shook his head. "You stay here. This ain't a ride for boys." "I'm not just a boy," Eli said, voice low. "It's my land." Walt looked at him long, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'll bring it back to you. That's a promise." They rode hard to the county seat, 3 hours through bitter wind and brittle mesquite. By the time they reached the courthouse steps, Slim was wheezing but steady, and June's affidavit was dry in Walt's vest pocket. The clerk at the counter blinked at them through round spectacles. "Granger McCready, what's this about?" "Filing guardianship of a minor," Walt said. "With land rights attached. We've got a surveyor's map, a signed affidavit, and a petition backed by witness statements." The clerk raised his eyebrows. "That's a lot for one boy." Walt's jaw tightened. It's more than a boy. It's about justice. The clerk stamped the papers without another word. By the time they returned to Dusty Creek, the sky had gone that strange color just before dusk, pale orange smeared with silver. Walt had a good feeling riding back in. Slim was humming some half-forgotten tune. Even the mare stepped lighter, like the papers in Walt's bag had settled more than just legal matters. But something was off. Walt spotted it before they even reached the ridge, black streaks on the horizon, faint but wrong. His stomach dropped. They rounded the bend. The barn was gone. What was left of it smoldered in the fading light, charred boards, collapsed beams, scorched earth where feed and tools used to be. A few hens clucked nervously near the ash heap, feathers singed and wild-eyed. Walt swung down, boots landing hard. Slim slid off slower, jaw clenched. Walt walked the perimeter, slow and tight-lipped, until he spotted something half-buried near the ashes, a single red glove, clean, untouched, placed, not dropped. Skeg. He held it up between two fingers. Slim just nodded, no words needed. Walt turned toward the house, panic rising now. Eli! He bolted for the front porch, heart hammering. The door was cracked open. Inside, no signs of struggle, no sign of Eli. Dishes still on the table, lamp out cold. Eli! A soft rustle came from above. Walt turned, eyes scanning the rafters, and then he saw him. Eli was crouched in the hayloft above the kitchen, tucked into the shadows like a barn swallow. His eyes were wide, rimmed red. His voice shook when he spoke. They came, in the night. Walt stepped onto the ladder but didn't climb. He spoke low, gentle. How many? 3, I think. I didn't see their faces. They were looking for a deed. Said I had it. You all right, son? Eli hesitated, then nodded once. I didn't say nothing. I just hid. Walt exhaled, more relief than breath. You did good. That night, the ranch sat quiet. Too quiet. The barn was still smoking, and the red glove sat on the table where Walt had placed it, like a challenge, like a signature. But tucked safely in the drawer beneath it were the stamped copies of the guardianship papers, the survey map, and the notarized affidavit. And this time, Walt wasn't riding into town to beg. He was riding to fight. The sheriff came at noon, not with questions, not with warning, just a badge, a frown, and iron cuffs. Walt was mending the back fence when he heard the hoofbeats, too many for a friendly visit. Sheriff Murtaugh rode up flanked by 2 deputies, all wearing that look men get when they know they've already made up their minds. Granger, the sheriff called, pulling his horse to a stop. Need a word. Walt stood slowly, wiped the sweat from his brow. Could have sent a wire if it was polite. Murtaugh didn't smile. Got accusations on my desk. Says you're harboring a child under false claims. Says you filed guardianship without legal right. Worse. Says you torched your own barn to create sympathy. Walt's jaw worked, but he kept his voice calm. You believe that? I believe Skeg's got papers, Murtaugh replied. More than you handed me last week. Until it's sorted, you'll be held at the jailhouse. You don't want to ask me about the red glove? The sheriff shifted in his saddle, eyes narrowing. You making threats, Walt? I'm making sense, Walt said quietly. But it didn't matter. The cuffs clicked around his wrists cold and quick. Eli stepped out onto the porch just in time to see them lead Walt away. His mouth opened like he wanted to shout something, but nothing came. They kept Walt in the back cell, the one with the leaky window and a cot that sagged like a tired promise. He didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't waste breath protesting. He just sat with his back against the wall, watching dust float in the bars of sunlight across the floor. That evening, the chaplain came. Reverend Lou Bennett, grizzled, thin, with a crooked cross on his belt and a back that had never quite healed from the railroad days, had taken to making rounds at the jail once a week. Most inmates avoided him. Walt nodded once when Lou approached. Didn't expect to see you in here, Granger. Didn't expect to be, Walt replied. Lou lowered his voice. June sent me. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a folded bundle, 3 broadside prints, yellowed with age but clear as thunder. Walt opened one. Across the top, land fraud, the schemes of Roland Skegg exposed. Below it, a grainy sketch of Skegg's face, followed by columns detailing prior scams across the territory, false heirs, shady deed transfers, shell buyers using fake names. One headline read, "Sheriff's Office Silent as Settlers Dispossessed." Walt stared. "Where'd she find these?" "Lou Goddard," Lou said, grinning. "Printer from up north. Got jailed 2 years back for slandering a magistrate, who turns out had it comin'. I was with him then. He remembered Skegg. Said he tried to run the same game in Larkspur County. Folks fought back." Walt nodded slowly. "That's something." Lou leaned in. "We've still got the map, Slim's affidavit, and these prints. They'll need more than words to break Skegg's grip," Walt said. "He's got Murtaugh, maybe more." "Then we bring truth to daylight," Lou said. "One page at a time." That night, Walt lay on the cot staring up at the cracked ceiling, the hum of crickets outside barely audible through the bars. Back at the ranch, Eli sat beside June on the porch steps, the boy holding one of the broadsheets in his lap. He traced the bold letters with his thumb, lips moving silently as she read it out loud, steady and clear. "He's not just fightin' for dirt," she whispered, brushing a curl from his eyes. "He's fightin' for you." Eli didn't speak, just looked at the fire, then the stars, then back to the door, waiting for it to open. The courthouse in Dusty Creek had never seen a crowd so thick, not even during tax hearings or that one scandal involving the mayor's daughter in a mule cart. By noon, folks lined the wooden steps, voices hushed with that familiar blend of curiosity and tension that always came before something real was about to break. Walt Granger, boots scuffed and beard freshly trimmed, sat at the defense table with his shoulders square. He wore the same brown vest he'd been arrested in, except this time, he wasn't alone. Judge Everett Danner, retired, cranky, and sharp as fence wire, had come out of the hills at June Mallory's request. Years ago, Matthew Turner had helped Danner's brother keep a farm from foreclosure. Now the old man repaid the debt with a leather briefcase and a growl for justice. Across the room sat Roland Skegg, oily as ever in a tailored waistcoat and a face full of smug. Sheriff Murtaugh sat behind him, arms crossed, trying to look impartial and failing miserably. Judge Collier presided, youngish, eager, still smelling faintly of ink and pine soap. This hearing concerns allegations of land fraud, improper guardianship, and the rightful claim of minor Eli Turner to his father's property. Skegg rose with confidence. "Your Honor, the boy has no surviving documentation, no will, no verified claim. The land is fallow, unpaid, and undeveloped. The law says unclaimed land can be petitioned." Judge Danner cut in with a slow rise. "May I, Your Honor?" Collier nodded. Danner opened his briefcase and laid it out on the table like he was dealing cards in a high-stakes game. "Here is a survey map signed by licensed surveyor Slim McCready. Here's an affidavit from said surveyor swearing under oath that Matthew Turner filed these boundaries properly. Here is a notarized guardianship petition signed by the boy's teacher, a reverend, and submitted to the county seat." He turned slightly and let the moment breathe. "And here," Danner continued, voice rising just enough to be heard by the back row, "are 3 broadsheets printed in Larkspur County outlining previous land fraud committed by Mr. Roland Skegg, including a pattern of false heir suppression and forged land transfers." Gasps scattered like dry seed in the gallery. Skegg's jaw twitched. "Circumstantial," Skegg snapped. "Old newsprint, no hard proof." June stood then, calm, sure. "I found this," she said, holding up a small red ledger, tucked behind the clerk's bookshelf. She walked forward and handed it to Judge Collier. "It's Skegg's payout log," she added. "Names, dates, and color codes. Red ink means bribery. One entry reads, Murtaugh, file closure red. That was the day Eli's father's will disappeared." Murtaugh shifted visibly. A man in the back muttered something about shame. The room stilled like a barn before lightning. Collier scanned the book, his lips pressed tight. "Is this accurate?" June nodded. "I'd swear to it." Danner tapped his papers gently. Your Honor, we're not just here about land. We're here because a boy's future was being stolen in broad daylight. He turned to Walt. And because one man decided that wasn't going to happen on his watch. Judge Collier leaned back slowly. Mr. Skegg, until these accusations are properly investigated, all your claims are suspended. Sheriff Murtaugh, hand over your badge and remain seated. The sheriff paled. Gasps turned to murmurs. Eli, seated beside June in the gallery, sat up a little straighter, his hand resting on the broken compass tucked in his shirt. Judge Collier turned to Walt. Mr. Granger, temporary guardianship of Eli Turner is hereby granted, pending final approval. You are free to go. Walt stood slowly. The room didn't clap. They just watched. Sometimes silence was heavier than applause. Outside, the air smelled like thunder was finally breaking. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills, word had spread like brush fire across Dusty Creek. Roland Skegg was under arrest. It wasn't just what happened in the courtroom. It was what came after. That evening, 2 men from the territorial capital arrived on horseback, state investigators with crisp vests, tight expressions, and a satchel full of subpoenas. Turns out, Judge Danner had sent a wire days before the hearing, and someone in Phoenix had been waiting for an excuse to crack down on land fraud out west. Skegg sat in a jail cell by nightfall, pacing like a caged fox, shouting things about misunderstandings and legal loopholes. Sheriff Murtaugh, stripped of his badge, sat on the other side of the bars. Neither man had much to say to the other. Eli stood outside the jailhouse with Walt, eyes wide but quiet. Is he going to stay in there? The boy asked. Walt looked down. Long enough. And what comes after ain't for us to worry over. The boy nodded slowly, like he was still learning how justice was supposed to feel. Not fast, not loud, but steady. They walked back through town, past the mercantile, past the dry goods shop where folks pretended not to stare. But it wasn't the kind of stare Walt was used to. It wasn't judgment. It was respect. Quiet, cautious, but real. June met them outside the churchyard with a small envelope clutched in her hands. The governor's office sent this, she said. Express courier, straight from the capital. Walt took it, eyes narrowing as he broke the wax seal. Inside was a single page. Confirmation that the Turner property had been cleared of all fraudulent claims. Eli Turner was recognized as legal heir and landholder under homestead protection. Guardianship was formalized until his 18th birthday. At the bottom, in bold letters, no further action required, land is not to be disturbed. Walt folded the letter slowly, handing it to Eli. The boy took it with both hands like it might break if held wrong. It's really mine? He asked. Walt knelt down so they were eye level. It's always been yours. We just had to remind the law. Eli blinked fast and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he looked up, voice catching. Can I still stay with you? Walt didn't smile, not fully, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Was hoping you would. Be a waste of a good fence rebuild otherwise. That night, back at the ranch, Walt lit a lantern and showed Eli how to brand a calf. The fire popped and hissed in the dusk, and the iron sizzled as it touched hide. The animal didn't flinch much. Walt's hands were practiced, sure. When it was done, Eli stood there quiet, the smell of smoke clinging to his shirt. He looked up at Walt, voice soft. Is it okay if I call you Pa? Walt froze just a second, just enough for Eli to notice. Then he nodded once. If it feels right to you, it sure as hell feels right to me. Eli didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. He just stepped closer and leaned into Walt's side, and Walt wrapped a calloused hand around the boy's shoulder. They stood that way while the fire died down, the sky turning that deep navy color where stars start to creep in. The battle was over. The scars would stay, but so would the land, and the boy, and the man who chose him. Sometimes justice doesn't come with noise. Sometimes it comes with a name whispered by firelight. The wind shifted that spring, not all at once, Not like a storm barreling through, but quiet-like, steady, the kind of shift you feel in your bones before you ever see it on the horizon. Dusty Creek didn't change overnight, but folks started tipping their hats a little slower when Walt Granger rode into town. And when they looked at Eli Turner, they didn't see a stray boy no more. They saw a landowner, a survivor, and a son raised right. Out at the ranch, the first task on Walt's list was rebuilding the north fence line. "Start with what got burned," he told Eli, "then build past it." The posts were cedar, cut clean from Slim's back lot up by Dry Peak. Slim had hauled them down himself in his wagon, claiming it was good for the lungs. June brought lemonade on the hotter days, and once, even Lou from the church came by with a pair of gloves and no sermon, just sweat and jokes. Walt and Eli worked side by side, hammering and stretching wire, hands blistered and shirts damp with work. The rhythm of it settled into them. Post, tamp, tie, move on. No talk about skeg. No talk about fire or courtrooms or crooked sheriffs. Just work. By the end of April, the fence stood straight as a moral line, stretching from the edge of the ridge to the bend in the creek, where new grass was already greening up. "That water's clearer than I ever remember," Eli said one morning, leaning on a post. Walt squinted toward the flow. "Funny what happens when you stop poisoning the land with lies." Eli smiled faintly, then pulled something from his pocket, his broken compass. He'd cleaned the glass, fixed the chain, and reset the dial. It still spun sometimes, but now it stopped just enough to offer direction. He held it out. "Think I might hang it on the fence gate, reminder of where I came from." Walt looked at him, a pride in his chest that didn't have a name. "Good place for it," he said, "but don't forget, you're still going somewhere." By summer, Eli had taken over the morning chores without being asked. He fed the chickens, learned to read the irrigation flow, and even started logging notes in a ledger June gave him. She came by twice a week now, teaching him land law and the kinds of numbers that built futures. One evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, the three of them sat on the porch. June sipped coffee, Eli wrote in his ledger, and Walt carved a fresh brand into a spare piece of wood, a stylized T joined with a G. "Turner Granger," he said when Eli looked up. "Might not be official, but it's honest." Eli grinned. "Looks better than anything Skeg ever filed." Laughter came easy after that. Before bed that night, Eli paused in the doorway. "You think someday this place will be mine for real? Like, really mine?" Walt nodded slowly. "It already is. But when you're grown, if you want to pass it on, or change it, or build something new, I'll be proud either way." Eli looked at him a long beat. "I think I'll keep it. Maybe add a schoolhouse next to the barn." Walt smiled. "You'd better talk to Miss June about that. She's got strong opinions on curriculum." Eli chuckled and headed to bed, the floorboards creaking soft behind him. Walt sat there in the quiet, staring out at the darkened fence line, the wind whispering through the wire. He'd fought cattle drives, crooked lawmen, wild winters. But raising a boy, that was the kind of battle a man chose with his whole heart. And for the first time in a long while, Walt Granger wasn't alone. He had a ranch. He had a reason. And he had a future walking around in boots 2 sizes too big, just trying to grow into them. Drop a comment if you believe doing right by someone can change more than just their story. It can change yours too.